right now. And I'm going to come back to my slides. Perfect. All right. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, wherever you are listening to this. Thank you for taking the time to join Neurovision and Innovative Security and Data in this webinar. We're going to cover how to manage worker and visitor access in 2021. And it won't be just me. I'm joined by two colleagues from Innovative Security and Data. We have Clint Wolf, Managing Director, and Trent Wilson, our security engineer. So welcome, guys. Thank you very much for being here with us.
No problem, Eliana. Thank you for having us.
It's great to have you sitting here and helping us run through how visitor management has changed lately, why it is important for businesses to think about it, especially in the context of a global pandemic. And especially thanks to the team here, we're going to hear about the top challenges that customers face and what are the keys for a successful deployment of these type of solutions. If you're watching this live, feel free to type in your questions. And if not, we're going to provide you with email addresses you can send your questions to. So please feel free to reach out. And I hope you enjoy this session and learn a lot. So we're going to set the tone first and why we think 2021 is the year to invest in this type of technology and brief you on the state of technology because there have been a lot of progress that you may not be aware of. We're going to do a demo actually in their office, in the Innovative's office of the check-in solution. And we're going to jump into the app also to check some of the logs. But then we're going to go deep into the challenges of these type of implementations and what are the tricks and tips that you can leverage when deploying them, or just to have this type of conversation with your customers and prospects. So let's get straight into it. The reason that we're starting with a graph like this is Neurovision is using deep learning technology, and deep learning technology is a subsection of machine learning and AI, the general term that we all know of. So we're talking about deploying an AI system into workplaces, and the industry is seeing this type of productivity enhancements comparable to the industrial revolutions that we've all learned in school. So the increase in productivity from adding deep learning, machine learning, and IoT sensors in the workplace is immense and therefore not negligible and worth considering it. And I know that this is something that involves a lot of thought, and that's why we brought you industry experts and one of our most trusted partners to help us cover this topic. But also, when COVID started, we were wondering what Australian workplaces thought on how they felt about AI. And when we asked them, we heard from executives that they believed AI will be a critical part of their business in the coming years. So there's definitely a revolution coming, and there's going to be winners and losers from that revolution. We know businesses cycles have sped up. So I wondered, Clint and Trent, if you've heard a similar uptake in facial recognition technology from your customer queries, if you've heard more from your prospects as well.
Yeah, definitely. We have a lot since I suppose probably more so, there was a little bit of traction before the pandemic, but since then, obviously, we're sort of trying to have something that's touchless, facial rec, and knowing who's on site, off site has been huge for contact tracing purposes in the last 6 to 12 months, for sure.
So you're seeing something similar to what we're seeing on our end?
Yeah, a lot.
Perfect. So in that case, thinking of technology investments, and we're talking precisely about access control, but we're also considering security setups and everything related to security infrastructure. So these type of decisions, we know that they're very taxing on businessmen. It takes, in average, between 3 and 6 years to upgrade physical access control components as per the material that we received on a survey. And when we asked our workplaces in Australia and New Zealand what were the biggest barriers for them to implement technology such as this one, technology that provides such a big increase in productivity as we've seen in the previous slide, what we heard from the market is that obviously cost is front and center of mind, And we're not surprised at this because the cost of these systems in the past has been pretty exorbitant. But the other things that come to mind when implementing or when thinking about implementing an upgrade are how simple or difficult it is to integrate with the existing infrastructures, privacy concerns, not only from your employees and staff member, but also from your visitors and customers and everyone that shows up at your premises. And then the other points that come up in conversation are how difficult it is to implement these type of systems and how tricky it is to manage credentials when you start adding an access control solution, a biometric solution, and so forth. So I wondered at this point, Clint and Trent, if you can elaborate on your end, is this the type of concerns that your customers and prospects bring to you when they discuss upgrading access control?
Yeah. Yes, cost is always a factor in anything, let's say, until they see the benefits of access control or facial rec, and when they don't have to sort of, I suppose, going back to cost, if you explain the safety side of it, the contact tracing ability, the OH&S limits the risk, it obviously the cost is moved aside. The integration side of difficult of integrating to an existing building is always a lot harder than a brand new greenfield site. So obviously, you know, sometimes they may not put it into one of their old existing, but a new development site, you know, that's what when they're really keen to adapt that. And then once they see that in their greenfield, then they'll go back to an old existing and see if they can adapt it over there as well. Because if you can enter this building and with facial rec, you can enter that building, vice versa, and different doors. So the integration and tracking where that person's been and that contact tracing. So again, once you explain to the customer, cost does get moved. I think personally, gets moved aside. There's still obviously privacy concerns and other things that come up in conversation, but
and most sites that do have access control do have a camera system as well. And to implement Neurovision, it's just a matter of relocating the camera to suit.
Exactly. Yep.
Definitely. But also one thing that I wanted to point out is, and this is something that's coming of feedback from you, that depending on the business, they may or may not have internal IT capabilities themselves. So they may not have someone to build that integration for them or to set it up. And that's when they rely on the expertise of teams like yours.
Yes, correct. Yeah.
So one point that I wanted to make at this stage is that obviously this is a difficult decision, as you point out, but then once customers see the value of having a system in place, the benefits are undeniable. So the point that I wanted to stress here is that all the indicators, all the economic indicators around Australia and New Zealand are pointing upwards and trending upwards, which is fantastic for us to live in this country. That is not just the GDP, but also money that's been committed from the government to encourage to modernize manufacturing in Australia and to strengthen the resilience of supply chains, obviously from the back of COVID, but as a strategic movement from a government. So if this goes according to plan, that means that hopefully this translates into more jobs and more traffic and more employees and more movement across these venues. So therefore, some of the problems that are in the back of the minds of executives and businessmen when making these decisions may become more exacerbated if they have more people in there. So what we would call a happy problem in a way. So but then also coming back from what you said, Clint, it's coming from the back of COVID, and COVID is definitely a driver of change. One thing that is striking and this is coming from figures from Australia, but I'm sure that there are similar figures around the world, is that due to the complexity of this pandemic, information needs to be provided as quickly as possible to try to gain speed on the back of the virus's spread. So for example, some industries here in Australia need to provide contact tracing details for their employees and shifts within 2 and 4 hours of reporting an outbreak. And that is very difficult to do if only very few workplaces, as you see on the screen, are able to know both the number and the real-time location of their employees. So I wondered, it looks like, and these are figures from last year, but it looks like there's still a long way to go for workplaces in Australia to implement solutions to know the real-time location of visitors and employees. Is this something you see also across your customer base, Clint, and your prospects?
Yes, we do. Trent might be able to sort of talk about a bit more about this one.
So, I mean, a lot of, it's pretty common to have QR codes in a lot of restaurants and buildings and that sort of thing. And I think it's more around people not being aware of Neurovision and facial recognition being an option. And I think that'll help. The more you roll that out and the growth towards that will definitely increase those numbers a lot more. But at this point in time, I think a lot of people just don't have the awareness for that.
Yeah, and actually this is a good segue into learning about touchless. I imagine that, and you've been implementing biometric solutions for a while, but I imagine the touching of surfaces is definitely a new concern that wasn't there before, at least not as present. So when we asked the market why they would invest in a solution like this, obviously the answer was to try to respond to the pandemic and to implement touchless, but also to try to take advantage of features from the new technology. What you were saying before, Clint, once you see it working, you realize what you can do with it. It makes to simplify the administration of physical credentials and cards and swipe cards with digital processes. So is this also something that comes up in conversation with you? Is touchless or replacing fingerprint scanners more common?
Yes, it is. Yeah, well, yeah, for me, when I speak to customers, it is. And obviously when you've got the added features, when you checking into site, checking out of site, payroll, obviously linking all that other information that you can get. It's
more prominent.
Cost is moved aside, and that's obviously the benefit of removing away from that touchless contact, but obviously you get a lot of other benefits with it as well that we'll touch on.
Yeah, and interesting you mentioned.
Once you touch a surface, obviously you can have a mask on and other stuff, but if you're touching a service from and it may not be an employer, maybe could be a delivery, it could be a contractor, it could be some of these people, we don't know who they are. Obviously they're coming to our buildings. Touching surfaces or checking in on these surfaces, and then we're then touching our face. So it can be
and the risk
quite challenging to move away from that.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think what you're mentioning is not negligible. I don't even remember if I've been touching my face. It's very difficult to be able to account for the behavior of everyone that crosses the door of your business. But then as a businessman, you have a duty of care to your employees. So that's also something to keep in mind. But you and I work for a company, but I'm also an employee, and we know that the reality of business IDs. So the ID of an employee is usually stored in pieces across multiple systems. So, and this is just an example coming off the back of some of our customers. We have IT is responsible for digital security, so they have information about my users, for example. HR cares about time and attendance, and therefore they have registration of my shifts. Workforce management systems usually hold the credentials and inductions that I need to fulfill to be able to be allowed on site. And security is responsible for roles and authorizations. So there you go. You have 4 teams managing portions of someone's identity through credentials and swipe cards. And to the right, that's real. You change jobs, you get promoted. There's changes in the reporting structure. You work on special projects, seasonal projects, on holidays come to mind. There's a million of shift changes. There's changes in security protocols. So it's very, very difficult to keep all these systems working in tandem if they're not integrated. And you may not want to actually, but then it's crucial for businesses, especially when they have to provide contact tracing data, to know the number of employees and visitors on site. And it's even better if you know their location in the case of the need for an evacuation. So this reality is what we want to talk about, because ultimately, why do we carry all those keys and swipe cards that Clint was mentioning? Why do we have to carry them around and make that someone's job and responsibility to manage them? Because you're constantly having to first prove that you are who you say you are. And as you say, Clint, you said before, we don't know everyone that comes to the business, and we shouldn't have to if we have the systems to monitor that for us.
That's right.
And when you're reaching a door, you really want to know if you're supposed to be there. That's what the swipe card tells you. What if your face could do that for you, right?
Exactly. And I suppose, obviously we deal with quite a few big corporates, the flexible work environment now that they can come in earlier, leave earlier, come in later, leave later, come in after hours, finish special projects. Yeah. That's when we actually know that there could be a breach, they need to do a contact tracing on through, a previous system that they've got, but they forgot about, Barry Smith that came in at 2 a.m. because there was a server down, IT had to come in. So this is where this platform becomes very, very powerful because you're capturing all the data.
And I just business experience these type of exceptions all the time, and either a control room manager or support agent needs to be aware of what's going on, or they have to chase the site manager, and you have to follow a chain of command to make sure that the person's supposed to be there, where all you needed to do is just put a camera there, right?
Yeah, correct.
And this is something that's going to resonate with our industry peers. What we're discussing here really is we are being humble by us acknowledging that as humans, we make mistakes, and we all do with the best intentions at heart. It doesn't necessarily have to be someone wanting to do something bad, but any human activity involves people risk. And that's why workplaces that are abided by workplace health and safety measures and the need to provide a safe space need to follow a hierarchy of control. And the hierarchy of control simply says that if you need to change someone's behavior because you can't just really remove the risky behavior, you're following in an administrative control. But if you automate the process, if you take the person risk out of the equation, what you end up with is automated control at this point, because you're isolating the person from the risk itself. And those risks, again, could be as simple as making a mistake. Maybe there's a typo in someone's name and suddenly the credentials don't work anymore. Maybe I just today forgot my card, and you know what? I have my colleague's card next to mine. I didn't mean no harm. I'll just swipe it. But that could lead into worse problems, and problems that could compound, such as a physical breach that could end up with the theft and loss of property, but could also it could end up with a data breach. And if you're talking about COVID and viruses, it could end up in someone getting sick or injured or dead. And as we saw before, we see even though Australia's numbers are great compared to the world, in terms of workplace health and safety and the safety of industrial workplaces, there's still a lot of room for improvement. And that is one of the targets of the Australian government as well. On this end, then, I think we're ready to dig into how touchless check-ins work. And that is just a brief intro before the team takes it over and we show you a live demo, which is exactly what everyone wants to see. So what we're here to talk about is all of this conversation yields into how we can make this simple. And as Clint mentioned, you may not be aware of, but we have a product called Neurovision, and this system can operate with any IP camera. So it could be a security camera, it could be a facial recognition terminal or a thermal LCD unit, or it could be an iPad. So by connecting a camera to Neurovision, we collect your face, and within a few milliseconds, and believe me, it's way quick, we can check, first of all, what your temperature is, if there's a thermal LCD unit in the mix. We can tell you are who you say you are, so your face matches an enrollment in a database. We could expose QR codes, the most typical one being COVID questionnaires, but you could also ask induction questions as well. And you can use it as a standalone system, but you can increase the efficiency of it by pairing it with an access control solution, for example, a turnstile or a door. Or you can also link it to, for example, a workforce management system to check someone's inductions and documentations through that. So in a process where everything is, or all these steps are automated, and we have an AI performing the most stringent tasks, what customers end up with is an automated workflow So automated because no one needs to interact at any step once it's set up. It's individualized because you can use the person's identity, so whoever they are, to guide them through different workflows of questionnaires and to grant them different levels of access. And in the end, you end up with consolidated and complete logs that aren't manual. So that means they aren't prone to human error, to any type of typos, or to, like you were saying before, forgetting what you were doing or where you were here with. So that works streamlined if everything is okay, but what if there's a problem in the process? At every step of the process, you can configure alarms, and those alarms could alert you in the event of an elevated temperature, or if someone is presenting themselves in front of a thermal camera with an occlusion in their head that is prohibiting the unit from capturing a valid temperature. You could also be alerted if that individual is in a blacklist or a watch list, maybe a former employee that's not meant to be allowed on site. Or you can leverage our labels, and we're going to talk about them soon. Labels are the objects we use to group identities, and therefore allowing you to create alarms for groups of people. So you could create an authorized area alarm and send a notification if someone is not supposed to be there. And then you can create alerts also along the way if the form is incomplete, if the person access has been denied because they're trying to access an area they don't have permission to, if whoever is in front of the camera hasn't fulfilled the site induction and isn't compliant. And the nice, or at least my favorite, is that you can also monitor the process with Neurovision and send an alert if someone skips any of those steps. So if you put through a process that you believe is the right thing to do for your employees and your staff, and someone is naughty enough to skip it, you can also be alerted upon that. And therefore, there you go. You have the entire access control and visitor management flow automated. At this point, though, what I want to highlight, and I like you guys to jump in as well to let me know if this is precisely what you encounter in these cases. The counterpart of this scenario is what businesses use nowadays. So if you have scatter systems, for example, you may be using a temperature gun, and we know that manual measurements are not meaningful because you need to have a very defined procedure to take everyone's temperature for them to matter.
That's right. You need to have the right environment, the right temperature. It can quite be unreliable and time consuming for that second person. Doing that, quite expensive to do that.
Plus that person's putting themselves at risk going up with the temperature gun standing next to the person who may potentially be infected.
Also that's also actually putting that in perspective. You actually have to dedicate a human being to fulfill that task. You have to have an employee dedicated to do that.
And you'll see later down, I suppose, where we speak about one of our sites where we actually were able to take 2 people away, I think 3 or 4 hour every morning for months. We'll talk about coming up, but it was worked quite well.
Definitely, and I think it helps, Clint, to put in perspective how many hours of a human resource would this be comparable to, because it's an important business decision too. And it's even more important if you think you're exposing that individual to the possibility of contracting a deadly virus.
Exactly.
Then when it comes to QR codes, and I'm sure you've seen your fair share as well, we've seen the use of third-party databases with questionable security practices, to say the least. And that also ends up with sensitive information stored on a separate system that you can't really interlink with the security event. And same with the rest of the systems as well. In the end, an automated system contrast is the manual process that goes behind it, that is obviously error prone, and that information ends up being stored so separately that then when the time comes to make meaningful business decisions, you don't have anything to back them for. So in a plant term, and we are talking about visitor management, and usually the first thing that comes to mind is securing the entrance. The entrance is generally that crucial point of stringent access control and a lot of validation checks. And that's not surprising because, as you were mentioning earlier, the cost of deploying these solutions used to be very high, but it's not anymore.
That's right. We're going back to that last slide, Leona, is that some of our customers had and still do all the below. So fingerprint scanner, obviously the third-party database, but swipe cards and then paper check-ins. So it's a slow process to get into a building. And then we still, is the information correct?
Yeah.
And that's been quite expensive to get in there, because there's a second person checking these people in.
Yeah.
Take this information to make sure that their contact tracing is up to date. Sorry to cut you off, but yeah, it's when you look at that, there's a lot of people still doing all those pieces.
Yeah.
And if you audit those pieces, I can guarantee you a lot of it won't be correct.
I think you've hit the nail in the head, Clint, to say that your face is undoubtedly you, whereas all the other methods of checking could be someone else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You've generally got a second person or third person writing down every staff member's name. And yeah, I suppose we'll touch on it again, but hard to remember everyone who they are when you're talking about 300, 400, 500, 600 employees coming in the morning.
Yeah, as you were mentioning before, also it's a humbling exercise to admit the likelihood of error is high in those conditions, and therefore the mechanism isn't as efficient as it could be.
Mitigating your risks.
Yeah,
definitely.
And then you've got other areas where you've seen where people are checking in themselves, writing down, putting the pen down, and people putting out the same pen, and then
it's compounding already. See,
already, and then they're using this. Yeah, and it's messy. Where this is why we get being asked the questions a year and a half ago, and this is obviously where our relationship has begun and been great, gone strength to strength, because we've been able to solve these problems for customers.
Certainly. So coming back to this, then. We usually start with the door, but to Clint's point, if the technology is available, if the cost is not prohibitive, and the expertise of a team here can help you figure out what works best for you, why wouldn't you expand this type of access control solution to some of your key doors? And therefore, your contact tracing procedure is going to be even more infallible. And then you start thinking, why not expanding it to every door? And that's the type of conversation that we want to encourage. We are really at this stage, and that's why we brought experts here to help us distill what are the key concerns to deploy this. But ultimately, that's the paradigm shift that we're aiming towards, to extend the capability of recognizing someone to that level of detail to as many doors as you need by the use of biometric credentials. But you know what? I think we've done a lot of talking at this point, and I think what people really need to see is they want to see it in action. So obviously,
so what we're going to do, Trent's going to film me. We'll take you to one of our internal doors that we've got it set up on. I'll swipe out to get out. Then I'll check in to come in, and thank God they haven't put me on the blacklist
yet.
We'll talk about the list later, because they're quite powerful for customers too. But you're right to go, mate.
Perfect. Get a tour of the offices as well.
Don't forget your hat, mate. Otherwise, the face will pick up Trent. So Trent's going to put his hat on. So we're coming down here. This is one of our leading access. This is our access control door with ICT Projo reader. Walk through, and I will just shut this, keep my head down. As soon as I look up, it'll pick me up. And obviously I look up, and that has stopped working. It's been faultless all day. I'm not sure what's happened there. Let's do it again. It may have something to do. Let's have a go again. Oh.
Yeah, maybe you want to look closer.
There we go. Sorry about that. It's been a few trials on that, but it was a bit delayed, that one. So
we can try
to give you an idea of what that does. I think the sun's coming through. So what we will need to do from here is make sure the boys will upload that photo of myself with that bright light on my face, and then that fixes it. So obviously when I've been checking out late at night or checking it early in the morning,
we've had to update those photos accordingly. So it's very important you allow time for commissioning. Don't assume you're going to put one photo in and it's going to be faultless. It's going to be photos of different lighting and different times of the day as well. So, but yeah, obviously, the ICT integration is working very, very well.
Awesome. I want to show, while you make it safe back to the to your desk, Clint, I want to show everyone what that looks like in the app. So as you see, and I'm logging into the web app at this point, and I'm logging in with Trent and Clint's permission to their account. So in the application, what you're looking at right now is the activity view. And in the activity view, you have a recount of every event that was seen through the cameras. So as you see here, in this case, we have Clint's event with a little door icon, and that door icon is highlighting that this event yielded an access control trigger. So that means that if you go to Protege's logs at this stage, Clint, there's a matching event for your entrance with this precise timestamp. And in this case, you have a video, you can obviously watch it yourself, but if you had to do some auditing, you'd be able to match it. So in the activity view, not only this, I can look back and see every event at the office that has triggered this type of results for you, for Trent, and for everyone that is in the system. And then obviously at this point, if I wanted to explore the activity view, I could make use of the other filters and focus on a specific label, so a specific group of people, or focus on a specific camera. But in this case, what I'm wondering is, I want to know more about Trent. I want to know if Trent was in the office this week, and it looks like he was in the office. He's in the office today, of course, but he was in the office yesterday and on Tuesday. And we're exposing this data in multiple ways for you to find the insights as easily as possible. Because one of the benefits of having AI doing the work for you is you don't have to do these calculations in your head, and you can consume the results on the activity view or export them to a CSV. So I can quickly know when Trent was seen, which days, what time he was first seen, what time he was last seen. So if I had to pull a report on his attendance, I'd be able to do that just from him walking through the door in his normal everyday life. And obviously this event, each of them could be playable, and you can also have additional metadata on them. But let's say, and I hope it doesn't happen, something bad goes on and we need to know who Trent was seen with to alert them of the possibility of something bad happening. I could run a contact tracing report just by pressing a button, and that report will tell me the cameras he's been seen on, but most importantly, people that he was seen on while on frame. And in this case, this means the likelihood of something going on with Clint is high, and therefore he needs to be alerted. So not only you gain the convenience of opening the door without needing to carry anything with you and still enforcing stringent access control processes, you also gain the benefit of all these added reports that could help paint a picture of Trent's whereabouts in this case, and pursue an investigation quicker. Points that you were making before, Clint, as well.
Yeah, no, this is where it becomes extremely powerful, and then we can customize who we staff, blacklist, whitelist, inducted, non-inducted, and that's where it becomes quite powerful for some of our, I suppose, construction sites as well. Yeah. And I just want to go back to, obviously, talking to the guys. I mean, obviously, this is a live webinar, and we've done the 10 run-throughs and tested that door multiple days, and it's faultless. But be aware that these things happen. It's probably a good thing it's happened in the webinar, because it shows you that, it's embarrassing, but it shows you that it does sometimes take a little bit of time, but the more photos that you load and the more time that you're allowed to commission the site with your customer and get the right photos, the right lighting, it becomes extremely quick. I mean, every day that's been triggering without fail, both ways. So I just wanted to demonstrate I suppose, getting out with access key and then coming in with face. But commissioning time is important, and gathering that information, gathering those facial shots in different light.
Definitely. So,
for our integration friends out there that'll be watching the video, that will be bringing me.
I think the point you're making, Clint, is very important. Quality of faces matters, and that's why you need to bring in the help of someone with the expertise of your team has. And that's why also we're dedicating a portion of this webinar to discuss challenges, because that's exactly what.
And you look at those cameras have been here for, both those cameras are probably 4 or 5 years old. So we haven't even done any updating on the cameras that we would sort of recommend to this right now if we're doing a new installation that work better. But that is demonstrating older camera technology with the new Neuro on it. So, you know, for the customers that are watching or for integrators that are watching, you don't have to go and upgrade.
No,
cameras.
That's a good point, because that's a question we get all the time. Do we need 4K cameras to run facial recognition?
No.
Yeah.
No.
I think they're at 2 meg or 3 meg.
There are 3 meg, so they're using the minimum specs.
Yeah.
So
the minimum of the minimum, I suppose they would be.
So you could go up if you desire, but that's not necessarily.
Yeah. Lots of news, lots of new cameras to be looking at now too. Lighting's important.
Definitely.
Base shots, photos are very important.
So behind the scenes, as Clint was mentioning, Neuro was running. So the system that we're discussing here is an Australian system we built from the ground up. Using proprietary algorithms, and our desire is also interestingly matches the motto of your company, Clint, as well. We want to protect essential workplaces, and what Clint showed is an example. And to put that in numbers, if you are talking about an individual person in front of the camera, you get a result in average within 30 milliseconds, and that could involve a temperature check if you choose to do so. And if you're thinking of an access control scenario, you authorize or deny access within 200 milliseconds, and an alert is sent if Clint was effectively in the blacklist. Thank God he's not. We would have sent an alert within 4 seconds. So these times, and as Clint was mentioning, these times are conditional to the fact that your identities are of good quality and have enough faces, but also some topics we're going to cover later on about stability and connectivity and so forth. And each of these steps you can follow in the app. So if you look at the left, we have a log from the application itself. So you have the clip of the event, the result with the appropriate labels. In this case, I have a VIP because someone was being very nice to me, but I'm usually the blacklisted person in the office too. There's also temperature analytics if there's thermal in the mix, and access control and alert information too. So you could follow the entire pathway of workflow within the Neurovision record. But most interestingly, when you extrapolate that, and these are real figures from one of our biggest customers, when you extrapolate and you think of a door, and we're thinking of a single door in this case, but you have so many within a workplace. If you make a door equivalent to a lane in a road, you're thinking about 1,300 workers working in 2 shifts across 24-hour spans. And that translates to roughly 54,000 recognitions in a day. That is discrete faces being recognized, and 3,000 tracks, which means 3,000 events from the beginning to an end, where an individual was recognized with their corresponding temperature results, and also 1,600 doors open, all within a day. Imagine if you had to do that manually.
Yeah.
Clint.
Well, there's customers now still doing that manually.
Yeah. And not only that, let's say you do. Imagine if you had to run a report on this, and it's, when I showed you the report on Trent, how quickly it was just to click a button, the system pulled up all the details for me. I didn't even have to think whether Trent remembered correctly, whether someone maybe forgot to announce a sick day. I didn't have to go back to my HR records. All I did was just click a button. And that's the type of efficiency gain that Industry 4.0 is talking about. And that is the type of gain that businesses could achieve by implementing a system like this, following, obviously, as Clint said, the recommendations of the experts. And that's what we're here for.
Time on site, time off site, checked in, health checked them, and then obviously made sure that they're inducted as well in certain areas. So yeah, very powerful.
Definitely. So in terms of Neuro, you mentioned labels, Clint, and that is one of the features that that we highlight more often, because labels are as simple as you can think of them as name tags, just more useful than them. You can create as many as you want in the system. And what they do is they let you filter reports. So then you can pull reports on those labels, but also create alarms. So if you have a blacklist, or you have a former employee group, or or a group of people you don't want to let in and you want to know about, you add a label and you create an alarm. But also there are positive use cases. Maybe you want to know when a certain group shows up. So labels help you with that. And
electrical contractor turns up to site. I get a notification and I know that they're on site now. Then I can go out to meet them in the plant room and make sure they're
inducted, right?
Or a new electrical contractor with the old ones, let's say, or their induction's up, or I want to know, when they do turn up, and I'm worried that they will just go through and start their works, so I can label them to notify myself, and then and I know when they're there. So.
Yeah, and so labels are definitely prominent, but then the other component, and this is something that we wanted to touch on as well, is you've seen in the case of the Teams Office, we're looking at keypads from Protégé, but in some cases, some businesses may not have an access control solution, may not want to use it in every door. And there are light ways of access control that they can be leveraged through Neuro as well. So we have an application that's called Doorkeeper, and Doorkeeper is a display solution, the iPad solution you see here, combined with a thermal camera in this case, or with another IP camera like the ones the team showed. Doorkeeper could display QR codes based on who the person in front of the camera is. And that's the example you're seeing in the clip. I am an employee in the system, and therefore my check-in process is just show your face, get a valid temperature, and you're in. But then you have someone like my colleague Shihan on the screen. Shihan is a contractor in the system and therefore needs to complete a QR questionnaire every time he makes it to work. So in his case, just by having a different face and being enrolled in the system, you can guide people through different workflows. And it's a point Clint made before. You don't want to stop people at the entrance. You want to streamline that flow as much as possible. And this way you can accommodate multiple workflows just using whoever is in front of the camera as a reference.
Yeah, that's right. Even to a point where you can label that your meeting's here as well. So when you've got bigger buildings, some of our bigger buildings we look after, there's 30 floors or that checking process down in the foyer area.
Yeah.
That executive or that person up above can know that they're there and they're coming up and be ready because they're on their way. So powerful. The push notification was very powerful as well, and what we can do with that.
And you can also use this as an enrolling mechanism. You can choose to create identities for people at this stage, inform them of consent, expose those questions to them, and then there goes your enrollment process. So you could create identities using faces from the cameras, or you can start the process by enrolling them through a solution like this.
And, yes, right. And change the questions when needed as well. Update the questions as we evolve and things change, and different areas are getting locked down and not locked down, so which is quite powerful.
Yeah, certainly. And then of course, on the back of this data, you run reports like contact tracing, you run analytics reports like temperature analytics if there's a thermal camera in the mix. And you also create what you were saying before, Clint, alarms that can notify you if someone is when they're not supposed to be, if someone is measuring an elevated temperature, or if someone is
a VIP, is here.
Exactly, is here for you. First.
Yeah, when
exactly.
Trent walks in the door, VIP, I get notified.
Good on you, Trent. You made it to the VIP. Here we go, all being blacklisted. So I think at this point we've conveyed to our audience the notion of why this is a game changer. But I think everyone at this point may be wondering, great, now what do I need to do to get to this stage, team? So help me get there. And that's why we've enlisted Clint and Trent to be here. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your company, and let's jump straight to those advice.
Yeah, so thank you. So the business was created 20 odd years ago and started in the sort of domestic market. That's where I'd come from my trade at 17 years old. Started quite young as a contractor, and then so we started branching out. And obviously now you can see in the map there of the that's a lot of our clients and our technicians. We cover a lot of wonderful corporates throughout Australia and New Zealand. And obviously bringing technology to them, they embrace as well as we do, and always sort of trying to do that and trying to better what we do every day and to support them better. And obviously we have our partner control room that manages after hours, but from here obviously we've got the support centre. This is where we're finding this neuro quite powerful, where we can help from construction all the way into corporate, and in some domestic scenarios as well, aged care, where this is becoming quite powerful. So yeah, with as you can see where our coverage is, and that's sort of what we do, and our main, obviously, making your world a safer place is what we live by, and if that fits in that's we'll have a go at it. So, yeah, we specialise obviously CCTV, access control and alarm systems, and maintenance, service, 24-hour monitoring, all the way from we have design department all the way to the commissioning handover, and then the maintenance and service department take over from there. So
perfect. So you control the entire flow from beginning to end.
Straight from the consultancy end, from the start all the way to the end.
Awesome. So
and a wonderful team we have at ISD, so, and growing.
That's what I wanted to highlight as well, that at least everyone that we've interfaced from your team clean is always on point and with the customer in mind front and center. And that's why I really enjoyed that you took the time to bring some case studies to us to tell us about the challenges that your customers were facing and how you helped them strive. Yeah,
and I'll hand this one over to Trent, because obviously he deals with a lot of this stuff and deals with the customers a lot. So yeah, go for it.
So for this one, we included thermal facial recognition to an existing access control. So one of our clients in the medical field, they are a supplier across Australia, and they have a lot of visitors, staff, and packages that get delivered, and they wanted a way to basically have a check-in at the entry point. So we implemented Neurovision and to their access, and essentially it works as an airlock that you arrive at the front entry, scans your face, reads your temperature, confirms your identity, and authorises you access, allowing you to get through the building. And it's been a great benefit to them.
Awesome. It's great to hear, because this is a type of challenge that I imagine a lot of businesses experience, and they may not know that this is available for them to help them solve. So what can you tell me about this case study as well?
So yeah, this one was out in the field. So we had a construction company working in solar projects approach us, looking for a solution because they had over 200 workers in and out to their projects. And
so back, and we touched on this, they had, I think, 2 people checking in, that amount of staff, temperature checking, managing their names and writing them down, and we're trying to remember 200 people's names in the mornings, quite difficult, but that's what they were doing, checking in through their environment, making sure that they're inducted, making sure that their temperature's right. Contact tracing purposes as well. It's a huge bit of land, but
yeah, so massive reduction in staff costs, being able to have them by automating this. And we also made it a portable solution. So as they moved on to the next project and around, they could actually take it with them and move it to the next site and continue inducting their staff. And
yeah, so this was actually set up in a portable unit. So we've got to, obviously you've got to try and control the environment. You can't do these things outside, for temperature checking as well, especially. But in a controlled environment, and it was quite powerful too, because then the guys ended up listing who was inducted on their site and who wasn't. And then if someone did come through, a truck driver or a new staff member, they would walk through in the morning, the guys would get a notification that they weren't certified to be there and had to go back out to do into their induction shed to come back through. So again, the way they managed it, they put their own little spin on it, asked for a few little custom things to be done, which you guys helped with. They got what they wanted, and I think that we worked out to be they'd paid off the whole system within a week of those 2 guys that were standing there for 2 or 3 hours every morning. Yeah, so it's quite a good return for them, actually.
Yeah, I mean, no doubt. You put it in, when you put it in resources perspectives, you're thinking of the human cost of having someone man the system, but also if you think of, and I know this wasn't precisely the case, but if you think of COVID, you're exposing that person to the likelihood of contracting something bad.
Yeah,
have someone there. So it's not just the cost,
Yeah.
but cost itself is a pretty big driver.
that's right. So we also knew who was on site, who was off site, and that was very powerful for them as well, knowing no one was left behind.
Definitely.
As well. So it was quite clever.
And a point that I wanted to make at this stage is usually when customers approach, and I'm talking precisely about Neuro, they usually start by asking us what the accuracy of the system is. But the inaccuracy was relevant in the early days of machine learning when you couldn't really distinguish what was a good from a bad vendor. But technology made a lot of progress since then. And the truth is, a lot of vendors can objectively claim that they can reach 99% accuracy and above. But the point here is not what the model could achieve in optimal conditions. The point is the point Clint made very eloquently before, that you need to have a stable environment to make sure that the system operates to its maximum capability. And that stability translates into the way people come to work. So the flow of people in and out, what Clint was mentioning earlier, you have 200 people, the data I showed you before, 1,300 people coming and going during 24 hours a day. That's very difficult to control. And the more stable that is, the better the system will work. But having stable lighting, and to Clint's point, making sure you have faces in those identities that represent those lighting conditions. So think of it that way. The faces in the system need to be similar to the faces the cameras will see, and not just during the normal day hours, but out of office hours with different lightings through different seasons of the year, and especially if it's thermal. And this is also something you said before, Clint. But as well, stability needs to translate into connectivity. So we're going to jump into architecture straight away, but the edge server sitting on the local network needs to have stable connectivity, and also the server needs to have access to a subset of outbound ports for internet traffic, and that also needs to be stable. And this is something also that I've heard you highlight a few times as well, Trent. You were talking about how networking needs to be very well thought of. So that's why we presented this slide at this stage. Yeah. So obviously we were discussing that the importance of this stability ends up with the need to capture good quality faces, and that boils down to choosing the right camera, right? And I'm sure you guys can talk hours about this, but what can you tell us about those cameras?
We could, again, and I suppose we're going to probably run out of time, but we could speak for hours on this, and there is choosing the right camera is very, very important, and height and environment. But again, making sure you're allowing time for that commissioning, for that camera to get used to that person and different lighting.
It's a learning AI, so it does take a bit of time.
Yeah, that's right. But there's obviously some information here that we can pass around.
Definitely, yeah. And also some about camera settings, points you were making before about not just temperature, but how the lighting conditions, the angle of the camera, the settings that you're running. So for example, one that I highlight all the time is shutter speed, because it's very tricky to try to remove motion blur from everyday faces, and shutter speed is one of those settings that will do the trick. But there are a handful also to consider in this case, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So briefly, I want to touch on architecture, because obviously you want to have the system running and you're wondering, great, you've told me I may be able to use some of these cameras that I have, maybe reposition them. What else do you need? So you need an edge server, and that server is going to sit on site in the local network. The server needs to be a low to mid-tier gaming machine. And I'm mentioning that because I know that other vendors use servers that reach 5 figures in terms of cost. This is not the case. We run on a combination of a GPU and a CPU that we help you spec when a project comes to us. And that server is responsible to match faces at the edge. So the processing of those faces and the results of facial recognition are chunked at the edge. And once there's a verdict at the edge, then the server is responsible to push that result to the applications. It could be Doorkeeper, like you see in this case, but also applications such as your mobile apps or the web app that you can access remotely. So Clint mentioned something before. What happens if you have to update your COVID questionnaire? In some cases, if you're not using Neurovision, you may need to go on site to manually tap those questions, where in this case, you just pull up the web app with an appropriate user level, you'll be able to set that survey and update it remotely.
Yeah,
So,
works very well.
Yeah, and that means that that you have access locally, and some information is bounded by the local site, and that other information is accessible elsewhere. And it's all coming back of two big portions of our infrastructure, and that is AWS. So our entire backend infrastructure is stored in the Sydney node of AWS, so it never leaves Australia, it never transits outside of the country. And access to the applications, and that includes the way the server connects to the applications to push results and to the infrastructure, is controlled by Auth0, which is a leading provider in authentication and authorization. So it's a third-party service. So both AWS and Auth0 have an extensive list of certifications in terms of security and safety protocols, and that's where we choose them as our providers. And at the same time, there's also, we take privacy very seriously, obviously, by dealing with sensitive information. So we take precautions such as the information is not stored in a way that it's that you can reverse engineer it. Every face that makes it to Neuro is transformed into an embedding. Identities don't need names to be stored in the system because you can store them with any identifier you choose to. So you couldn't have Neuro to be as populated or as deprived of information as you desire, and it would still operate in the same way. And the only comment I want to make outside of this is you can use it as a standalone system, but it becomes much more powerful, to some of the team's points, when you link it to your access control provider, your VMS, or actually any other system of your choice by using the APIs if you have the capability, or if you don't, reach out to Innovative's team or to us, because we may be thinking about the integration you need already, and it may be in the roadmap as well.
Yeah. And obviously the good thing about this is that we, with the clients, obviously permission, we have access to this from our support center to be able to log in and help manage and fix some of the teething issues at the start of the commissioning time. So
that's
remote access is very, very important for the client and for us as well. So.
And not just that, what you mentioned too, there's this, in not every case, but there's that preconception that you install it and it should work like perfectly from the get-go. But the truth is every environment is different. And as you pointed out, they need to be monitored and adjusted accordingly. And that involves repositioning cameras, replacing cameras for different models, but also, like you say, adding faces, making sure that the traffic is going in the appropriate direction and whatnot. So there is a lot of tuning that can happen. And if you can't push the environment further, think that also at the ML level, there are thresholds that could be adjusted. So there's always steps for the team to troubleshoot and for us to jump in as well. So definitely a work in progress, definitely, as you say, an investment in time and resources, definitely worth it.
Yeah, on the bench, setting it up on our test bench works straight away every time because that environment's controlled and it's set to that. And again, noticing at the front, obviously the sun's in a different position today and we haven't picked up on it. But that, again, loading that photo in now, we did this again, but it is, you know, and I can vouch for a 2-second stare at the camera for a 2-second and you throw it. Yeah.
And this is one of the features that we've produced, but the commitment that we have to partners such as Innovative Security and Data, but also to our customers, is the SAS Promise. We're going to update and release new features, and we're constantly doing that. This is just a reminder of the very last few we released, but Neurovision is an Australian company with a team based in Sydney. We have an ML team that's continuously updating our machine learning models and the edge devices software, but also the applications. And we continue to work with partners to hear what the customers need, such as the example we were discussing earlier about reports. So if there's a feature that you're after that it's not necessarily available, don't be afraid to have this conversation with the team. That's what they're here for, and with us. So that's why we're giving us both our contact details. The point I think at this stage that I want to convey is this is definitely a game changer if you are thinking of an investment of this sort. We're ready to help you navigate the uncertainties that you and your team may have. So all you need to do is just drop us a message. I don't know, Clinton, Trent, do you have any final thoughts? Is there anything we haven't touched that you'd like to mention?
No, I think we've covered pretty much everything. Thanks to everyone that's out there that's watching. I really appreciate it. And thank you so much to your team. Eliana, been wonderful. The support guys are always getting through to you guys really quickly, and you're fixing any little issues that we have, and that's what it's about. We are at the edge of technology here, and it's all very new. It's been running what are we about 12, a bit over 12 months for us, 13, 14 months. But any issue we've had has been resolved within close of business that day. So our clients have been quite impressed.
Thank you.
We've been able to save them a lot of money and reduce their risk, and that's what we're about.
Yeah, and especially if they've got a question or can this do this, we would love for this feature, and being able to reach out to you guys and see it happen so quickly is just amazing. So
thank you. It's been amazing to work with you too, and that's why also I know this may seem like scary technology, or there's a million questions popping to people's heads. Just reach out, have a discussion with us, and we'll see where we take it from there. Awesome.
Nice.
Thank you very much for your time, Clint, and for your time, Trent. I think it's
No problem at all.
thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Hope you have a great day, and thank you everyone for joining. See ya.
Yeah. Bye. Thank you.
Bye.